We were beginning to think that it really was unsinkable.
They told us on board, this is the strongest ship of the world and never can sink.
What if a single pilot could take down an entire battleship? What if one man became the most feared aviator of World War II? During the war, German pilot Hans Ulrich Rudel flew more missions than anyone else. But was it all skill, or was there more to his success? How did one German pilot sink multiple battleships in World War II? Let's find out. At the start of World War II, battleships ruled the seas. Heavily armored and armed with massive guns, they were thought to be nearly indestructible. Air power had proven deadly against ground targets, but sinking a warship from the sky was another challenge. High-altitude bombers lacked accuracy, and dive bombers risked being shot down before they could strike. But planes had an advantage: surprise, speed, and the ability to hit a ship's weakest points. The British and Americans were developing aircraft carriers, and Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 proved just how vulnerable battleships were. Even before that, Germany was already testing ways to take out warships from the air. The Luftwaffe had mastered blitzkrieg, using aircraft to dominate land battles, but warships were different: fast, well-defended, and built to survive attacks. The key was precision. That's where Junkers Ju-87 Stuka came in. Designed for pinpoint dive bombing, it could hit targets with incredible accuracy. Against tanks and bunkers, it was deadly. Against battleships, it seemed impossible. Then came Hans Ulrich Rudel. He didn't just prove it could be done, he redefined naval warfare. Rudel wasn't a natural ace. When he joined the Luftwaffe in 1936, he was considered below average and was assigned to reconnaissance instead of combat. Disciplined but unimpressive, he spent years observing rather than fighting. That changed in 1941 with Operation Barbarossa. Given a chance to fly Stukas, Rudel quickly proved his skill. Unlike high-altitude bombers, Stuka pilots had to dive steeply, endure crushing G-forces, and release their bombs with split-second precision. It was high risk, and Rudel thrived. Rudel's defining moment came in September 1941 when he was sent on a mission that would change his life, and naval warfare forever. His target? The Soviet battleship Marat, stationed in Kronstadt, harbored near Leningrad. This wasn't just any warship. The Marat was a monster of the sea, armed with huge 12-inch guns that could blast German forces from miles away. It was a major problem for the advancing German army, and the Luftwaffe had already tried, unsuccessfully, to sink it. The ship had survived multiple attacks, and the Soviets knew how important it was, which meant they weren't going to let it down without a fight. On the morning of September 23, 1941, Rudel and his squadron of Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers took off toward the heavily defended harbor. The Stuka wasn't built for taking out warships, it was designed for precision bombing on land. It was slow, not very maneuverable, and an easy target for anti-aircraft fire. But it had one key advantage: it could dive almost straight down, delivering bombs with deadly accuracy. As Rudel's squadron approached the harbor, the Soviet defenses roared to life. Anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with deadly shrapnel, trying to take down the German bombers before they could reach their target. Most pilots would have released their bombs from a safer distance and pulled away, hoping for a lucky hit. But Rudel wasn't like most pilots. He kept going, diving lower and lower, straight into the firestorm. By the time he released his 1,000-kilogram bomb, he was flying so low he could actually see the Soviet sailors scrambling on deck. Then he pulled up, barely escaping as the bomb crashed through the Marat's deck and detonated deep inside the ship. The explosion was massive. Ammunition stores inside the battleship ignited, and in seconds, the front half of the ship was gone. The Marat began to sink, its bow completely destroyed. Soviet forces later managed to keep part of it afloat and use it as a stationary gun platform, but it was never fully operational again. Rudel had just made history. No pilot had ever sunk a battleship with a dive bomber before. It was the kind of attack most military strategists thought was impossible. But Rudel had done it, and in the process, he proved that aircraft could take down even the most powerful warships. His skill, precision, and sheer nerve had changed the game, and this was just the beginning. Rudel's success didn't stop with the Marat. He kept pushing the limits of what a dive bomber could do, fine-tuning his attacks to hit the most vulnerable parts of enemy ships. Unlike most pilots who just aimed for the general structure, Rudel studied warships carefully. He figured out that hitting a ship's magazine, the storage for its ammunition, could cause a massive explosion, while striking an engine room could leave it stranded and defenseless. These lessons made him an even deadlier pilot. After proving that a dive bomber could take down a battleship, Rudel kept going. He helped sink a Soviet destroyer, a cruiser, and more than 70 landing craft. His ability to strike naval targets wasn't just impressive, it was changing how air power was used in warfare. Before, battleships had been seen as the ultimate force on the seas. Now, aircraft were proving that they could be just as deadly. But by 1943, the biggest threat Germany faced wasn't on the water, it was on land. The Soviet Union had recovered from its early defeats and was now producing tanks in massive numbers. German forces were being pushed back, and the Luftwaffe needed a way to stop the waves of Soviet armor rolling toward them. Once again, Rudel was at the center of the solution. The Stuka was modified into a specialized tank killer, fitted with two 37mm cannons under its wings. This version, called the Kanonenvogel, Cannon Bird, was designed to destroy tanks from the air. But using it effectively was a different challenge. Tanks were built to withstand heavy fire, and hitting them from the wrong angle wouldn't do much damage. Rudel figured out the best approach, attacking from above but angling his shots toward the thinner armor on the back and sides of the tanks. It was a risky maneuver that required flying dangerously low, but it worked. At the Battle of Kursk, the largest battle in history, Rudel put his new tactics to the test. Kursk was a brutal, chaotic fight, with thousands of Soviet and German tanks clashing across open fields. The Red Army had improved its armor, and newer Soviet tanks like the IS-2 were nearly invulnerable to German weapons from the front. But Rudel and his squadron found their weak spots. They dove in low, firing at tanks from the rear, blasting through the armor where it was weakest. On his first day at Kursk, Rudel destroyed 12 tanks. Over time, his tally kept climbing. He didn't just lead attacks, he perfected them, making each run more efficient and precise. His total number of tank kills eventually reached 519, a record that no other pilot in history has ever matched. Skilled he was, Rudel wasn't untouchable. The kind of flying he did, low, close range, and under heavy fire, made every mission a gamble. He was shot down more than 30 times. Most of the time, he managed to crash, land, and escape, but one of his most dangerous moments came when he went down behind Soviet lines. After a rough landing deep in enemy territory, Rudel and his gunner, Sergeant Erwin Henschel, were forced to run for their lives. Soviet troops were closing in fast, and their only way out was across a freezing river. They had no choice but to dive in. The icy water was brutal. Rudel managed to fight through it, but Henschel didn't make it. Despite losing his crewmate, Rudel kept moving, evading capture and making his way back to German lines. Even after an ordeal like that, he refused to stop flying. But his luck didn't last forever. In February 1945, with Germany on the brink of defeat, Rudel was leading another attack on Soviet tanks near the Oder River. As he lined up his shots, anti-aircraft fire ripped through his plane. A piece of shrapnel tore into his cockpit, slamming into the right leg. Blood poured from the wound, and the pain was unbearable. But instead of ejecting or crash landing, Rudel stayed at the controls. He knew that if he went down over enemy territory, he wouldn't survive. Somehow he kept his damaged aircraft in the air and made it back to German lines. The injury, however, was too severe to ignore. His leg had to be amputated below the knee. For almost any other pilot, that would have been the end of the war, but Rudel wasn't like most pilots. Just 6 weeks after the amputation, he was back in the air flying combat missions with a prosthetic leg. Even as Germany collapsed around him, he refused to quit. By the time the war ended, Rudel had become the most decorated pilot in Nazi Germany. He was awarded the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, the highest military honor Hitler ever gave. No one else ever received it. But Rudel's story doesn't end there. After the war, he fled to South America, where he helped other former Nazis escape justice. Unlike many German officers who distanced themselves from the Nazi regime, Rudel never renounced his beliefs. He stayed involved in far-right politics for the rest of his life, permanently tainting his legacy. There's no question that Rudel was an extraordinary pilot. His skill, bravery, and ability to push aircraft beyond their limits made him one of the deadliest pilots in history. He proved that planes could sink battleships, that air power could destroy tanks, and that one pilot could change the course of battles. But skill alone doesn't define a legacy. The choices a person makes, both in war and peace, are just as important as their achievements. Rudel's combat record is unmatched, but his unwavering loyalty to the Nazi regime makes him one of history's most controversial figures. So in the end, Hans Ulrich Rudel was more than just a pilot. He was a reminder that even the most remarkable skills can't erase the past. If you're interested in more fascinating history content, make sure to click on the next video.